Back. In this video, we are going to expand our knowledge on function arguments. As I just mentioned earlier, parameters are the information that need to be passed into the functions for it to do its work. Python supports several types of arguments: required arguments, keyword arguments, default arguments, a variable number of arguments. So what is the required arguments? Required arguments are the type of arguments that has to be present when calling a function. These types of arguments also need to be in the correct order for function to work as expected. For example, we are going to create a new function. So I'll start by defining a keyword def. I'm going to say division. I'm going to say first, second, and then we can do a return of first divided by second. Let's call this function. So I'll type division with parentheses, and I'm just gonna save a file and run this code. Once I run this code, I get an error. The type of error is type error, and the message that we get says missing two required positional argument first and second. So in this case, first and second is a required argument. If you don't pass them, your function will break the code and you get to see a type error. Let's talk about keyword arguments. If it's necessary that you call all the parameters in the right order, you can use keyword argument in your function call. You can use this to identify arguments by their parameter name. So in this case, I'm going to pass in, let's just say 50, 5, and I'm gonna use a print statement to print the result. Let's run the code. Now we get 10. Our code is running without any errors. In this case, we are defining 50 for a first argument and 5 for a second argument. Now let's just say you would like to define 50 for a second and 5 for the first. In that case, we will have to define in the right order. So we say 5, 50. Now this case is okay because our function is very simple, but sometimes your function needs more than 50 arguments or 10 arguments. How do we actually specify that this value is going to refer for particular argument? You could do that with the keyword argument. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type a name for my argument and then define a value, let's just say 60, and then I'll define 5. Okay, now it gives me an error. It says positional argument after keyword argument. So once you start with defining a keyword argument, you're gonna have to finish with the keyword argument as well. So I'll say first would be 6. Okay, I'm gonna run this code and I get 0.1. So what's happening is 6 is getting divided by 60. So it doesn't matter if you define a 60 first or after defining this first. The 60 will be assigned to second and the 6 will be assigned to first because we have used keyword arguments. Talk about default arguments. Default arguments are those that take a default value if the no argument value is passed during the function call. You can assign this default value with the assignment operator, and we're gonna take a look at how we do that. Just to show you guys, I'm gonna remove first and second argument from the function call of a division function. So let's just say if I run this code, I get to see type error. It says missing two required arguments. Now my function is basically using required arguments, which are required. Now what if we want to make sure that if nobody passes in any value for these two arguments, I want to use the default value for that. So the syntax to define that is just adding equal to sign and the value. So I'll say 60, and then for the second one I'll say 6. Okay, let's run the code now and I get 10 back. Now I'm not calling this function and specifying the values, because if I don't pass in a value, it's not going to throw me any type error anymore, because the value as set as a default value already. So that's the default arguments. Now we talk about a variable numbers of arguments, which means that we don't know how many arguments we're going to pass into this division function. For demonstrating that, I would like to create another function with addition. So I'll say def addition, and then here I would like to pass in a keyword which will take variable number of arguments. So we start that by asterisk symbol and then say just args. Okay, now within the function I'm gonna create a variable called total equal to 0, and then we use a for loop I in args, and then we say total plus equal to I, and then we can return total from our function. Now what this addition is going to do, it's going to take a number of arguments, probably numerical values, and it's going to run a for loop of all the arguments and then add all those values to the total and then return total from a function. Now I'm going to call this with, let's just say we call a print, or maybe we can have a variable outside a equal to addition, and then we can use, for example, 20, 10, 50, 100. Okay, now I'm going to print a so we could see the output from addition function. Let's run the code. Now we get to see 180. So the number of arguments that we can pass in now with this syntax using asterisk and then args.